I'm going to talk about some of the interesting aspects of astrocatastrophism. We have been lied to about so much, so many things for so long. Where do you begin? But I want to begin reading a book that I bought one of the original copies of years ago, and it's basically Atlantis, the Antediluvian World by Ignatius Donnelly, Donnelly. And this particular copy is 1882. And it's important to understand that even though Plato was the one that recorded the conversation between Socrates and one of the priests of Egypt, he got it from Solon, who was the gentleman who actually was the one that interviewed the priest of Egypt. They have a lot. The priest basically said this: you Greeks don't have any history. We Egyptians know the real history. Now, one of the hardest things to talk about is not only true history, but prehistory. And I want to share this with you. I'm going to read it because I don't want to screw it up and paraphrase it. And this is coming from about page 8 of the original book. And here's what he said. Solon, hearing what was said, what do you mean? Talking about that the Greeks don't know true history. And he said, I mean to say, he replied, that in mind you are all young. There is no old opinion handed down among you by ancient tradition, nor any science which this hoary with head age. In other words, you're getting gray and you don't know what you're doing. And I will tell you the reason of all this. There have been and there will be, again, many destructions of mankind arising out of many causes. I'll say that again. There have been many and there will be, again, many destructions of mankind arising out of many causes. Now, ladies and gentlemen, there is Phaeton. He goes in talking about one of the Greek myths. There is Phaeton, which even you have preserved, that once upon a time, Phaeton, the son of Helios, having yoked the steeds in his father's chariot because he was not able to drive them in the path of his father, burnt up all that was upon the earth and was himself destroyed by a thunderbolt. Now, this has a form of a myth, but really signifies a delineation and declination of the bodies moving around the earth and in the heavens, and a great conflagration of things upon the earth recurring at long intervals of time. Notice this, that the priest that Solon is listening to knows the difference between actual events and the myths that the Greeks believed that were based on the actual events. And that, by the way, ladies and gentlemen, I go into great detail in my book, True Legends, and also Angel Wars. Angel Wars is a very prominent book. Unfortunately, we're out of stock for another month on that, but that's neither here nor there. Now, listen to this. It is impressive to me that this priest is talking about times going back 9,000 BC. And 9,000 BC is a big deal. So here's what it says. Now, this has the form of a myth, which we just talked about. And here's what he says. Earth, and he's talking about conflagration of things upon the earth recurring at long intervals of time. When this happens, those who live upon the mountains in the dry and lofty places are more liable to destruction than those who dwell by rivers or on seashore. And from this calamity, the Nile, who is our never-failing, quote, Savior, saves and delivers us. When, on the other hand, the gods purge the earth with a deluge of water, among you, herdsmen and shepherds on the mountains are the survivors, whereas those of you who live in either the cities are carried away by the rivers into the sea. But in this country, neither at that time nor at any other time does the water come from above on the fields, having always a tendency to come up from below. And in the Bible, the Old Testament, it talks about the fountains of the deep were open. Now, the reason I'm starting out this QCast is even today on Drudge front page, there's a story that Elon Musk landed the rocket back on the launch pad in Florida. But he made the statement that we must go to Mars because if we stay on this planet, ultimately we're going to face a doom scenario that's even beyond those who would call, those of us who are trying to warn, doom or fearmongers. The massive sinkholes opening up, the ground swelling, the ground breaking, All these different events that are happening now, the floods obviously in California and the weather warfare that's taking place. I make no apologies for that. It is full-scale weather warfare. The temperature of the water in the Pacific is going to an all-time high. And listen, let me share something. Fukushima will be seen in retrospect as one of the most deadly events in the history of the Earth, possibly aligning even with the world of fantasy in the death and destruction it's going to bring. I don't think people understand that one of the byproducts of fission, F-I-S-S-I-O-N, is heat, extreme heat. And if you remember when Fukushima first went off, the seawater, they were trying to cool the core. And it wasn't just one reactor, it was 3, I believe, and then a breeder reactor in which plutonium was actually generated. When you get into the nuclear physics of Fukushima, what's happened is that standard nuclear physics and all of the exposure and dose rates have been abandoned. They've been forsaken and forgotten. So why this is critical at this point is simply this. The Great Starvation has begun. Floods can destroy more land and more property based on probably 50 years of insurance claims in the history, even going back into the turn of the century, than any other single natural disaster up until Fukushima. I categorically reject that Fukushima was a natural disaster. Again, it was not natural. What's really unnatural is the response of the mainstream murderers. Now, you know, we usually say MSM is mainstream media. But again, it's going to become very apparent as more cancer turns up and more people die by the their medical response or biological response to ionizing radiation, whether they're ingesting it, breathing it, eating it in fish, whatever. The point that is really critical for you to understand that things have not settled down in any way, shape, or form. One of the most important volcanoes in the world has starting to go active. And what's fascinating is Anak Krakatoa, which means son of Krakatoa. All of the different myths and legends associated with the volcano, and especially in the area of Krakatoa and Mount Tambora, Indonesia, all of the historic influences on the weather, on growing seasons, and on famine, it seems like they're all kicking into high gear. The late Sue Bradley, a very dear friend of mine who wrote essays with me, she has an essay which I'll be posting on my website, Sue Bradley, and it may already be on the internet someplace, but it's Anak Krakatoa, and some people pronounce it Krakatoa. It was used to be spelled with an O. Now it's spelled with a U, Krakatoa. And based on some of the South Pacific pronunciations, that may be closer to the correct one. But why is this critical? Because, as I said, Anak Krakatoa, which means the son of Krakatoa, Anak, when Joshua and Caleb went into the Promised Land in the Old Testament, there they beheld the sons of Anak, the giants.